My name is Meredith Walsh, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm standing in the middle of what my parents think is my brand new luxury penthouse, watching them march through the door with my sister Lorelace trailing behind, surrounded by moving boxes and suitcases like she owns the place. They didn't call, they didn't ask, they just assumed they could waltz into my life and take what I'd spent 15 years bleeding for while they mocked every dream I ever had. My mother's got that satisfied smile on her face, the one that says she's already won. My father's unpacking boxes like he's doing me a favor. And Lorelace? She's texting on her phone, probably telling her friends she lives in a penthouse now. They had no idea what I'd prepared for this exact moment. Before we dive into how I got here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Are you team boundaries or team family no matter what? Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with entitled relatives. And subscribe because this story is about to get wild. Trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare actually started. Growing up in the Walsh household meant living in Lorelace's shadow, and that shadow was long, cold, and deliberately cast over every single thing I tried to accomplish. My sister was born 2 years after me, but you'd think she invented oxygen the way my parents worshipped her. When Lorelace turned 16, my father Roland surprised her with a brand new silver Honda Accord, complete with a giant red bow on the hood and a party in the driveway where half the neighborhood came to celebrate. I remember standing at my bedroom window watching it all unfold, knowing that when I turned 16 6 months earlier, I got a card with $50 in it and a lecture about responsibility. I took the bus to school every single day for 2 years, while Lorelace complained that her car didn't have heated seats. College was where the favoritism really showed its teeth. My parents sat me down the summer before my senior year of high school and explained, in the most patronizing voices imaginable, that they'd be paying for Lorelace's entire college education because she had so much potential. When I asked about my college fund, my mother Constance actually laughed and said I should look into scholarships because I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. I applied to 37 scholarships, wrote essays until my fingers cramped, and cobbled together enough financial aid to attend state school. I worked 3 jobs that first year, pulling double shifts at a coffee shop, tutoring other students in economics, and doing data entry on weekends. I'd see Lorelace's social media posts from her expensive private liberal arts college, pictures of her sorority parties and spring break trips to Cancun, all funded by our parents, who told me they were teaching me the value of hard work. Birthdays were another slap in the face year after year. Lorelace got elaborate themed parties, the kind with professional photographers, and catered food and guest lists that looked like a Hollywood premiere. When she turned 21, our parents rented out an entire restaurant for her celebration. My 21st birthday, we went to a chain restaurant where my father used a coupon, and my mother spent the whole dinner talking about how proud she was of Lorelace's recent decision to switch majors for the 3rd time. They gave Lorelace a trip to Europe for graduation even though she'd dropped out twice and taken 6 years to finish a 4-year degree. When I graduated summa cum laude with my business degree, they didn't even come to the ceremony because it conflicted with Lorelace's friend's wedding. The emotional abuse was constant and insidious, the kind that makes you question your own reality. When I'd point out the blatant favoritism, my mother would sigh dramatically and tell me I was being jealous and petty. My father would shake his head and say I was too sensitive, that they loved us equally, that I was imagining things. They gaslight me so thoroughly that for years I actually believed something was wrong with me for noticing how differently they treated us. Lorelace never defended me, never acknowledged her privilege. She'd just smile sweetly and accept every gift, every opportunity, every advantage like it was her birthright. Family dinners became torture sessions where every one of my achievements was minimized, and every one of Lorelace's failures was reframed as a learning experience or a brave choice. My parents told me constantly that I'd never amount to anything, that my business degree was worthless, that I was wasting my time with my corporate ambitions. Meanwhile, Lorelace could announce she was dropping out of college to become a lifestyle influencer, and they'd applaud her entrepreneurial spirit. The double standard wasn't just unfair. It was cruel and deliberate, but here's what my parents didn't understand about constantly telling someone they'll fail. Sometimes it doesn't break them. Sometimes it forges them into something harder, sharper, more determined than they ever could have imagined. Every insult became fuel. Every dismissal became motivation. I promised myself that one day, I'd be so successful they'd have to acknowledge me, and then I'd have the power to decide whether they deserved a place in my life. 10 years ago, when I was 22 and fresh out of college, I landed what I thought was my dream job at a rapidly growing tech startup in the city. The company was small enough that I could make a real impact, but big enough to offer serious growth potential. I threw myself into that job with everything I had, working 12 and 14-hour days, learning every aspect of the business, and making myself indispensable. Within 18 months, it developed an idea for a revolutionary app that would streamline their entire customer service platform. I spent 6 months perfecting the pitch, running the numbers, building prototypes on my own time. When I finally presented it to the executive team, they were blown away. The CEO literally stood up and applauded. They told me this was exactly the kind of innovative thinking they valued, and they promised me a vice president position once the app launched. I was so excited I made the mistake of sharing the news at a family dinner. It was one of those obligatory monthly gatherings my parents insisted on, where I usually sat quietly while everyone fawned over Lorelace's latest failed venture. But that night, I couldn't contain myself. I told them about the app, about the promotion, about how my career was finally taking off. My parents offered lukewarm congratulations that felt more like obligations than genuine happiness. Lorelace, though, seemed unusually interested. She asked detailed questions about my boss, about the company, about when the launch would happen. I was so desperate for family approval that I answered everything, even gave her my boss' name when she asked. I thought maybe, finally, they were taking me seriously. 3 weeks later, I walked into work to find my boss' demeanor completely changed toward me. He was cold, distant, and called me into his office with HR present. That's when my world fell apart. Apparently, someone claiming to be a family member had reached out to him, expressing serious concerns about my mental stability and ethical boundaries. This person, who turned out to be Lorelace, had told my boss that I'd actually stolen the app idea from a family brainstorming session and was trying to pass it off as my own work. She'd been so convincing, so earnest, so beautifully manipulative that my boss believed every word. She'd met him once at a family gathering I'd reluctantly brought her to, and she'd used that brief connection to destroy everything I'd built. I tried to defend myself, to explain that Lorelace was lying, that she had a history of jealousy and sabotage, but the more I protested, the more unstable I sounded. My boss had already made up his mind. Instead of the promised promotion, I was demoted to a junior position. The app still launched, but I received none of the credit. And here's the part that still makes my blood boil. They offered Lorelace a consulting position, brought her in as an outside voice, to provide fresh perspectives on team dynamics. She lasted 3 months before getting bored and quitting. But the damage to my reputation was permanent. When I confronted my parents about what Lorelace had done, they stared at me like I was speaking another language. My mother actually defended her, saying Lorelace was just trying to help by expressing legitimate concerns, that I shouldn't have been so careless about sharing proprietary information at family dinner. My father suggested maybe I wasn't ready for that level of responsibility anyway, that perhaps this was a blessing in disguise. When I finally cornered Lorelace alone, she didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She laughed, this light, tinkling sound like breaking glass, and told me I was too naive for the business world, that I needed to learn that nice girls finish last. She said I should thank her for teaching me a valuable lesson. The attacks didn't stop there. Over the next 6 months, Lorelace spread carefully crafted rumors throughout my workplace. She'd befriend my colleagues on social media, and then drop poisonous little comments, just enough to make people doubt me without being overtly malicious. My projects were suddenly scrutinized more heavily. My ideas were met with skepticism. I went from rising star to suspicious liability in a matter of months. I was almost fired twice, only saved because my actual work results were undeniably excellent. But I had to rebuild my reputation from absolute zero, smile through meetings where I knew people were wondering if I was a fraud, and work twice as hard as everyone else just to be seen as barely competent. The emotional devastation of realizing my own family would actively sabotage my success was almost worse than losing the promotion itself. I tried to cut contact with them after that, but my parents were masters of guilt and manipulation. They'd call crying about how I was tearing the family apart. How could I be so cruel to my own sister over a misunderstanding? Didn't I know family was supposed to forgive? Like an idiot still desperate for parental love, I let them pull me back in. That was a mistake I'd spend years paying for. After the nightmare at the tech startup, I made a decision that everyone in my family called idiotic. I quit my corporate job and started my own consulting firm. No safety net, no backup plan, just me and a vision, and an absolutely terrifying amount of student loan debt. I rented the cheapest studio apartment I could find in a neighborhood where I heard gunshots at night and had to check my shoes for roaches every morning. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a desk I built from cinder blocks, and a door I found on the street, and a chair I rescued from someone's trash pile. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for months on end, because every single dollar had to go toward building my business. My parents called constantly during this time, and every conversation was a fresh reminder of their contempt for my choices. My mother would sigh heavily and ask when I was going to stop this silly phase and get a real job. My father would lecture me about responsibility and financial planning, conveniently forgetting that he'd never taught me a single thing about money management while funding Lorelace's endless string of expensive whims. They'd tell me I was throwing my life away, that I was being stubborn and foolish, that I should swallow my pride and just get a regular job with benefits and security. Meanwhile, Lorelace was living in their basement rent-free at 26 years old, contributing nothing, working nowhere, and they treated her like a guest at a luxury resort. My first client was a small family-owned business that needed help with their digital transformation. The owner, a kind older man who reminded me of what a real father should be, took a chance on me when no one else would. I poured everything into that project, working 16-hour days, learning new software programs at night, teaching myself skills I didn't have because I couldn't afford to hire anyone else. When I delivered results that exceeded their expectations and helped them increase their revenue by 40% in 6 months, he referred me to 3 other businesses. That's how it started, slowly, painfully, one small victory at a time. Each success felt like proof that my parents were wrong about me, that I could build something meaningful on my own terms. 2 years into running my business, my parents called with what they framed as a reasonable request. Lorelace had finally decided to start her own business, some vague concept about lifestyle coaching and wellness consulting that she'd been talking about for months without any actual planning or follow-through. They asked if I could loan them $10,000 to help her get started. I should have said no. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to refuse, but that pathetic part of me that still craved their approval, that still hoped if I just helped one more time they might finally see my value, that part made me say yes. I transferred the money the next day, money I desperately needed for my own business expenses, telling myself this was an investment in family harmony. 3 weeks later, Lorelace posted pictures all over social media from a luxury resort in the Bahamas, pristine beaches, infinity pools, premium cocktails with little umbrellas, the works. She'd spent every penny of that $10,000 on a vacation, not a business expense in sight. When I called my parents, absolutely furious, demanding they make her pay me back, my mother got defensive and snippy. She told me that Lorelace had been under tremendous stress and needed a mental health break, that I was being cruel and unsympathetic to my sister's well-being, that family should support each other unconditionally. My father backed her up completely, saying I was being selfish and money-obsessed, that I'd lent the money freely, and had no right to dictate how it was spent. Not invested, not loaned, they said I'd given it as a gift. That betrayal was different from the first one. The promotion theft had been shocking and devastating, but this was coldly calculated. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I needed that money. They knew Lorelace had no intention of repaying it. They used my own desperate need for their approval as a weapon against me, and they felt absolutely no guilt about it. When I demanded the money back directly from Lorelace, she laughed and told me to take her to court if I cared that much about money. She knew I couldn't afford a lawyer. Something hardened inside me after that. The part of me that had been desperately seeking their love finally died. I stopped answering my parents' calls. I stopped going to family events. When they showed up at my apartment unannounced, I didn't open the door. I blocked them on social media, changed my phone number, and built a wall around myself that I swore no one would breach again. Therapy helped me understand that their treatment wasn't about my worth. It was about their dysfunction, their need for a scapegoat, and a golden child to play out their own unresolved issues. Understanding didn't make it hurt less, but it did make me stronger. 5 years of absolutely relentless work transformed my life in ways my family never anticipated. The small consulting contracts grew into medium-sized ones, which grew into partnerships with major regional companies. My specialty became digital transformation for traditional businesses, helping old guard companies adapt to the modern marketplace without losing their identity. I developed a reputation for delivering results, for being reliable and innovative, for understanding both the technical and human sides of business change. Word spread. My client list expanded from local businesses to regional corporations, to eventually landing a Fortune 500 contract that changed everything. The revenue explosion was almost shocking. I went from scraping by, hoping I could make rent, to suddenly making 7 figures annually. I hired a team of 15 brilliant people, moved my operation from my studio apartment to a professional office space with exposed brick walls and modern furniture. Industry publications started reaching out for interviews. I was invited to speak at conferences about entrepreneurship and digital strategy. Business schools asked me to guest lecture. Everything I'd worked for, everything my parents said was impossible, was actually happening. The validation felt incredible, but it wasn't about proving them right or wrong anymore. It was about proving something to myself. Then, predictably, my parents reappeared like ghosts, showing up to a feast they didn't cook. They'd been silent for almost 3 years. No birthday calls, no holiday texts, nothing but blessed silence while I built my empire. But apparently, one of their friends had seen an article about my company's success in a business magazine. My father, Roland, called out of the blue one Tuesday morning, his voice dripping with false warmth and manufactured pride. He said they'd always known I was special, that they'd always believed in my potential, that they were so incredibly proud of everything it accomplished. The audacity of those lies almost made me hang up, but morbid curiosity kept me on the line. I asked him directly where I'd been when I was eating ramen noodles and working out of a studio apartment that barely qualified as human housing. Where was this pride when I was struggling and desperate, and calling them for emotional support, only to be told I'd made my choices and had to live with them? He fumbled through some excuse about wanting to give me space to succeed on my own terms, about not wanting to interfere with my journey. It was garbage, and we both knew it. Then came the real reason for the call. They wanted to visit, to see my office, to reconnect as a family now that I was successful, and could presumably be useful to them again. Against my better judgment, I agreed to a visit. They arrived with Lorelace in tow, and the sight of my sister walking into my beautiful office space made my stomach turn. She was 30 years old now, still unemployed, still living with our parents in the same bedroom Shed had as a teenager. Shed gained weight and lost the effortless beauty Shed once wielded like a weapon, replaced by a bitter, envious energy that radiated from her like heat from asphalt. She looked around my office with naked resentment, touching my things like she was pricing them for an estate sale. My parents oohed and ahed over everything with performative enthusiasm, talking about family legacy like they'd had anything to do with my success. The real purpose of the visit emerged over lunch. My parents asked, with what they thought was casual subtlety, if Lorelace could stay with me for a few months. They framed it as giving her a fresh start in the city, exposure to professional environments, a chance to network and figure out her path. The reality was, they wanted me to subsidize her existence the way they'd done for 30 years and were finally tired of doing. I refused flatly. I told them my home was my private sanctuary, and I had no interest in hosting anyone, especially not Lorelace. My mother's face tightened with that familiar disappointment, that look that used to make me scramble to fix whatever I'd done wrong. My father accused me of abandoning family now that I'd made it, of forgetting where I came from. Lorelace just stared at me with those cold eyes, and I knew this wasn't over. What I didn't know until weeks later was that Lorelace had launched her own sabotage campaign the moment she left my office. She'd somehow gotten contact information for my biggest client, a manufacturing company whose digital transformation project was worth $200,000 to my firm. She called their CEO and introduced herself as my business partner, claimed we'd had a falling out over ethical concerns, suggested there were financial irregularities in how I ran the business. She was smart enough not to make specific accusations, just drop enough poisonous implications to make them nervous. The CEO called me confused and concerned, asking about my business partner and what issues we were having. I had to spend 3 weeks doing damage control, providing documentation, offering references, basically proving I wasn't a fraud. I almost lost the contract. The stress nearly broke me. And my parents, when I confronted them about Lorelace's actions, claimed she was just confused and trying to help, that I was being paranoid and cruel. That's when I knew I needed to prepare for the inevitable next attack, because there would definitely be a next one. After landing 3 more major contracts and seeing my annual revenue climb past the $2 million mark, I decided to do something I'd dreamed about since I was a teenager, eating ramen and dreaming of escape. I bought a luxury penthouse in the most prestigious downtown high-rise in the city. The building was 42 stories of gleaming glass and steel, home to CEOs, professional athletes, and old money families. My penthouse was on the top floor, a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom masterpiece, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the entire city. On clear days, I could see for 30 miles in every direction. The sunset turned my living room into a cathedral of gold and amber light. The place cost $3.5 million, and I paid for it in cash. The penthouse had everything I'd ever fantasized about during those hungry years of struggle. The chef's kitchen had commercial-grade appliances, marble countertops, and a wine fridge built into the island. The master suite was larger than my entire first apartment, with a bathroom that featured a soaking tub overlooking the city and a shower with 6 different spray settings. There was a private terrace wrapped around 2 sides of the penthouse where I could drink my morning coffee surrounded by potted trees and flowers, feeling like I was floating above the world that had tried so hard to keep me down. Every single element of that space represented something my parents said I'd never achieve, and I loved it fiercely. I kept the purchase completely private, telling none of my family about this massive life milestone. I didn't want their toxicity contaminating this symbol of my success. I didn't want my mother's backhanded compliments about how I'd finally done something worthwhile, or my father's lectures about property taxes and investment portfolios, or Lorelace's jealous, hungry stare cataloging everything I had that she didn't. I hired movers discreetly, changed my address quietly, and settled into my new home with the kind of peace I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my entire life, I had a space that was completely mine, untouched by family dysfunction, a sanctuary they knew nothing about. But I should have known that secrets don't stay buried when you have people actively trying to dig up dirt on you. My accountant Felix, a man I'd trusted for 4 years to handle my business and personal finances, turned out to be a snake hiding in professional clothing. I didn't know it at the time, but Felix had dated Lorelace briefly 6 years earlier, before I'd even hired him. It was a short relationship that ended badly, but apparently Shed stayed in touch with him sporadically over the years. When he saw the paperwork for my penthouse purchase go through, complete with the address and purchase price, he sent Lorelace a friendly little text message catching up and mentioning what an incredible place her sister had just bought. He probably thought he was being innocuous, making conversation. What he actually did was light a fuse. Lorelace told my parents immediately, and they became obsessed. My mother called me out of nowhere one afternoon, her voice syrupy with false casualness, mentioning that Shed heard through the grapevine I'd bought a mansion downtown. I felt my blood pressure spike immediately. I corrected her that it was a penthouse, not a mansion, and asked how exactly Shed heard about a purchase I'd deliberately kept private. She dodged the question with expert skill, deflecting into excited questions about square footage and amenities, and whether I'd hired an interior designer. I could hear the wheels turning in her head, calculating how to exploit this new information. Within days, the hints started. My mother called to say it must be so big and lonely for one person. Wasn't I worried about rattling around in all that empty space? Didn't I ever want company? My father chimed in with observations about how families should share in success, how it was selfish to have extra bedrooms sitting empty when people you love could benefit from them. They were so transparent it was almost comical. Except it wasn't funny at all. I set firm boundaries, telling them explicitly that my home was my private space, and I had no intention of hosting anyone, ever. They seemed to accept this with disappointed sighs and resigned acceptance. I actually believed they'd backed off. That was my mistake. While I was busy running my business and enjoying my new home, they were plotting something I never saw coming. Moving day for my new custom furniture was supposed to be a joyful experience. I'd spent months selecting every piece, working with a designer to create spaces that reflected my personal style, rather than just copying what rich people were supposed to have. The movers were scheduled to arrive at 9 in the morning with a truckload of beautiful things that would finally make the penthouse feel completely like home. I woke up excited, made coffee in my new espresso machine, and stood on the terrace watching the city wake up beneath me, feeling grateful and proud, and completely at peace. The doorbell rang at 8:30, earlier than expected. I assumed the movers were ahead of schedule and buzzed them up without checking the camera system. When I opened the door, my parents and Lorelace stood there surrounded by moving boxes, suitcases, and even a pet carrier with Lorelace's cat yowling inside. My mother beamed at me like she was delivering wonderful news. My father was already pushing past me into the foyer, boxes in his arms. Lorelace followed, texting on her phone, not even looking up as she violated my sanctuary. I stood frozen for a moment, my brain struggling to process the absolute audacity of what was happening. I finally found my voice and demanded to know what they were doing here. My mother announced, like she was giving me a gift, that surprise. Lorelace was moving in. She said it with such cheerful confidence, like this was a foregone conclusion and I'd be delighted by their initiative. My father was already scoping out bedrooms, commenting on which one would be best for Lorelace. She had multiple suitcases full of designer clothes, furniture of her own that they intended to bring up in a second load, decorative items, kitchen supplies, everything someone would need for a permanent move. They'd even brought her cat, a Persian that cost $3,000 and had a better pedigree than most people. I blocked my father's path to the bedrooms and told them they absolutely could not just decide this without asking me. My mother's face shifted instantly from fake cheer to cold manipulation. She launched into a guilt trip that she'd clearly been rehearsing, talking about everything they'd sacrificed raising me, how they'd fed and clothed me for 18 years, how I owed them for my very existence. She said this was what family does. They support each other. They share their good fortune. They don't hoard their success, while family members struggle. My father backed her up, his voice taking on that stern, authoritative tone that used to make me comply immediately as a child. He said I had 3 bedrooms and was being selfish, keeping them all to myself when my own sister needed a place to stay. Lorelace finally looked up from her phone, and the entitled smirk on her face made my hands clench into fists. She informed me she'd already told all her friends she lived here now, had posted about it on social media, had given out the address to people who'd be visiting. She spoke like it was already done, like my opinion was irrelevant, like this was her home now and I was just going to have to accept it. Building security had called me earlier, and I'd wondered why. Now I understood they'd bribed the doorman to let them access the building without my permission. They'd paid him $500 to look the other way while they brought all of Lorelace's belongings up the service elevator. The situation got worse when I tried to physically remove them from my home. My father pulled out a folder of documents that made my blood run cold. They'd created forged co-ownership papers, using information Felix had leaked about my property purchase. The documents looked official, complete with notary stamps and legal language declaring that Lorelace had a 50% ownership stake in the Penthouse, based on family investment agreements. It was completely fabricated, every word of it a lie, but it looked convincing enough to complicate things. They'd clearly planned this for weeks, maybe months. Felix had provided them with enough inside information to create believable forgeries. I called building security, but my parents had prepared for that too. They presented their fake documents to the security team, who didn't know what to believe. The head of security, a reasonable man named Gordon, told me this was now a legal matter, and he couldn't forcibly remove them without police involvement or a court order. My parents knew exactly what they were doing, exploiting the fact that legal processes move slowly while they established residency. If they stayed for even 30 days, eviction would become a nightmare of legal proceedings that could take months. The final blow came when my father threatened to sue me for elder abuse if I tried to force them out. He claimed I'd made promises to care for them in their older years, that I'd verbally agreed to provide housing, that refusing family during their time of need constituted abandonment and abuse. He even pulled out his phone and showed me fabricated text message screenshots where I'd supposedly made these promises. The texts were clumsily edited but looked real enough to cause me problems. My mother started crying on cue, talking about how cruel I'd become, how success had turned me into someone who'd hurt her own parents. Lorelace just watched it all with that same smirk, her arms crossed, clearly enjoying watching me squirm. I felt the walls closing in, felt my carefully constructed new life crumbling before it had even begun. My sanctuary was violated. My boundaries were shattered. My own family was using fraud and manipulation and fake legal documents to steal from me. Again. The pattern was so familiar it made me sick. For one terrible moment, I wanted to break down completely, to let them win because fighting seemed impossible. But then I remembered something. I remembered that I'd anticipated exactly this scenario. I'd known they wouldn't leave me alone once they found out about the penthouse. I'd prepared for this, and watching the 3 of them standing in my space, so confident they'd won, so certain I was trapped, I smiled. That smile made all 3 of them hesitate. I straightened my shoulders, let my smile grow wider, and calmly told them that before they got too comfortable and started unpacking all those boxes, I'd love to give them a proper tour of the penthouse. My mother looked confused. My father looked suspicious. Lorelace just rolled her eyes, clearly thinking I was stalling or trying to appeal to their better nature with some desperate play for family sentiment. But I insisted, and something in my voice must have been compelling because they followed me through the space as I pointed out features and amenities with the enthusiasm of a real estate agent. The first revelation came when I directed their attention to small, professionally installed cameras mounted discreetly in every room's corners. I explained that the entire penthouse had a comprehensive security system installed before I'd even moved in, with cameras recording everything in high definition with audio. Building regulations required posted notices about video surveillance, and I gestured to the small signs by every entrance that they'd completely ignored in their rush to invade my space. Every word they'd said, every threat they'd made, every forged document they'd presented, all of it was captured on video from multiple angles. The color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he might pass out. The second revelation was even better. 6 months ago, right after Lorelace contacted my biggest client and nearly destroyed that contract, it hired a private investigator. Not just any investigator, but a former FBI agent who specialized in financial fraud and family law cases. This investigator had been quietly documenting everything for half a year, had discovered Felix's betrayal and connection to Lorelace, had documented their ongoing communication, had tracked how my parents had paid Felix for information about my finances, had photographed them meeting with Felix to plan this penthouse invasion, had recorded phone calls where they discussed the forged documents. Every piece of their scheme was documented in a file that was currently sitting in my attorney's office. The third revelation shattered their remaining confidence completely. This wasn't actually my penthouse. I mean, I'd bought a penthouse, that part was true. But this unit? This was a rental property owned by my lawyer friend Sutton, who'd agreed to help me set up the perfect trap. My real penthouse was in a different building entirely, 3 blocks away, even more beautiful than this one and completely unknown to my family. This unit was rented for exactly 1 month for the specific purpose of this confrontation. Sutton was watching everything unfold in real time through the security system from his office downtown, already preparing legal documents based on what he was witnessing. The fourth revelation involved Felix and federal crimes. I informed them, with immense satisfaction, that Felix had been arrested that very morning by the FBI for wire fraud, identity theft, and unlawful disclosure of private financial information. Had been singing like a canary, providing investigators with every detail of how my parents had approached him, how much they'd paid him, what specific information had provided. Financial crimes investigators were now very interested in those forged co-ownership documents because creating fake legal papers with the intent to defraud someone of property rights is a federal offense that carries serious prison time. The fifth revelation targeted Lorelace specifically. Remember all those friends Shed told about moving into a luxury penthouse? I'd contacted every single one of them over the past week through social media. I'd shown them documented evidence of Lorelace's lies and manipulation going back years. Not just about me, but about them too. I'd compiled screenshots of texts where Shed talked behind their backs, fabricated stories, used people for money and favors, and then discarded them. Her entire social circle had abandoned her before she even walked through this door. Those posts Shed made about living in a penthouse now looked pathetic and desperate. Her friends were commenting, asking if it was another one of her lies. Her carefully constructed image was demolished. I gave them a choice, and I delivered it with the calm confidence of someone who held every card. They could leave immediately, never contact me again, sign legal documents promising to stay out of my life permanently, and I wouldn't press any charges. I'd let the Felix situation play out without their involvement, wouldn't pursue the forgery charges, wouldn't sue them for attempted fraud and extortion. Or they could refuse, could try to stay, could continue this fight, and I would unleash every legal resource I had. I'd press criminal charges. I'd sue them civilly for damages. I'd make sure every newspaper and media outlet knew about their attempted fraud. I'd ensure that my father's reputation in his community was destroyed, that my mother became a social pariah, that Lorelace's name became synonymous with failure and fraud. My mother started crying, real tears this time, instead of the manipulative kind. My father's jaw was clenched so tight, I could see the muscles twitching. Lorelace looked like she wanted to lunge at me, her hands balled into fists, but she knew Shed lost. They gathered their boxes in humiliated silence while building security watch to ensure they actually left. The cat carrier bumped against walls as they hauled everything back to the service elevator. Not one of them said a single word to me. They couldn't even look at me. As the elevator doors closed on their defeated faces, I felt something I hadn't felt in my entire relationship with them. Complete and total power. For the first time in my life, they couldn't hurt me. I'd outsmarted them, outplanned them, and won decisively. I genuinely thought that would be the end of it. I'd humiliated them so thoroughly, demonstrated such complete dominance over their schemes, that surely they'd slink away and leave me alone. But I'd underestimated just how deep their cruelty ran, and how far Lorelace would go when her ego was bruised. As they were leaving the rental penthouse, Lorelace leaned in close to me while my parents were distracted, loading boxes onto a luggage cart. She whispered, her breath hot with rage against my ear. that Shed destroy my business, my reputation, everything I'd built. She promised I'd regret humiliating her. The look in her eyes was absolutely feral. Over the next 2 weeks, Lorelace launched the most comprehensive smear campaign I'd ever experienced. She created multiple fake accounts on every major review site and left scathing reviews of my consulting firm. These weren't obvious fake reviews either. She was smart about it, making them detailed and specific enough to seem credible. She claimed I'd mismanaged projects, overbilled clients, failed to deliver promised results, even suggested there were ethical violations in how I ran my business. She posted on industry forums under fake names, warning other businesses about hiring me. She submitted anonymous complaints to professional organizations I belonged to, triggering ethics investigations that required hours of my time to resolve. But the attacks went further than just online. Lorelace somehow obtained contact information for all my current clients and started calling them directly. Shed introduced herself as a concerned former colleague who felt obligated to warn them about my business practices. She never made specific accusations. She was too clever for that. But Shed dropped vague hints about financial irregularities, about projects that went wrong, about other clients who were unhappy, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. My parents enabled every bit of this, providing her with money for burner phones and supporting her mission to take me down. My father even called some of my business partners directly, claiming I was mentally ill and needed intervention, suggesting they shouldn't trust my judgment. 3 of my major clients suspended their contracts pending investigation within 1 week. My biggest project, a comprehensive digital transformation for a manufacturing company worth over $300,000, was suddenly on hold while they verified everything about my business. My employees started getting nervous, asking if the company was stable, if their jobs were secure. Trade publications that had written glowing profiles about me started receiving anonymous tips, suggesting those profiles were based on fabricated success stories. A local news outlet picked up a twisted version of events, running a story with the headline, "Tech CEO Abandons Homeless Sister," that made me look like a monster who'd thrown my struggling family out of my home. My mental health took a severe beating during this period. I was barely sleeping, spending 18 hours a day doing damage control and fighting fires. My therapist increased our sessions to twice a week. I lost 15 pounds because eating seemed impossible when my stomach was constantly twisted with anxiety. There were mornings I couldn't get out of bed, lying there staring at the ceiling of my real penthouse, wondering if I'd fought so hard just to lose everything anyway. This was my first near defeat, the moment where I genuinely considered giving up entirely. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough for this. Maybe I should just let them win and disappear somewhere they'd never find me. But 2 allies emerged who changed everything. Harriet, a former colleague from my tech startup days 10 years ago, saw the news story and reached out immediately. Shed witnessed firsthand what Lorelace had done to me back then, and had felt guilty for years that she hadn't spoken up. She provided a detailed written testimony about Lorelace's manipulation, about the lies Shed told my boss, about the pattern of sabotage. She agreed to go on record, to talk to my clients, to verify that I'd been a victim of family sabotage rather than an unreliable business owner. Her testimony was credible and compelling, and it started to turn the tide. The second ally was even more crucial. Sterling, the CEO of the manufacturing company, whose contract had been suspended, decided to investigate the claims independently, rather than just accepting them at face value. He hired his own private investigator to look into the anonymous complaints and warnings. What his investigator found was a clear pattern of coordinated harassment from the same IP addresses, phone numbers that traced back to accounts in my parents' names, social media accounts that were obviously fake. Sterling was furious that someone had tried to manipulate his company with such blatant lies. He not only reinstated our contract but publicly defended me in industry forums and threatened to sue Lorelace for attempted interference with business relationships. The domino effect was swift. Other clients who'd been nervous saw Sterling's very public defense and realized they'd been manipulated too. The news outlet that ran the negative story issued a correction after my lawyer provided them with court documents proving my parents had attempted fraud. Professional organizations closed their investigations when evidence showed the complaints were malicious and unfounded. Felix, trying to reduce his own sentence, provided prosecutors with detailed testimony about the entire scheme, including recordings of conversations where my parents and Lorelace explicitly discussed destroying my business. I filed a defamation lawsuit against Lorelace that was so airtight, my lawyer said it was the easiest case he'd ever seen. The restraining orders were granted within days. A judge, clearly appalled by the documented evidence of systematic harassment and fraud, issued permanent orders prohibiting my parents and Lorelace from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 500 feet of my home or office, from contacting my clients or employees, from posting about me on social media. Violations would result in immediate arrest. The civil case against Lorelace proceeded rapidly through the courts because she had no defense against the mountain of evidence. This was my second near defeat. The moment during the trial when my parents brought in paid actors posing as witnesses, claiming it'd been an abusive daughter who'd physically and emotionally tormented Lorelace our entire lives. The judge seemed to be considering their testimony seriously, and I felt the ground shifting beneath me. But my childhood neighbor Geneva, who I hadn't seen in 15 years, read about the trial and came forward voluntarily to testify about what she'd witnessed growing up next door to us. Geneva's testimony was devastating to my parents' case. She described in painful detail how she'd watched them favor Lorelace consistently, how she'd seen me crying on our porch after being excluded from family events, how my parents had openly mocked my ambitions while praising Lorelace's laziness as free-spiritedness. She had old photos from neighborhood gatherings showing the stark difference in how we were treated. The judge's attitude shifted completely. He ruled decisively in my favor on every count, ordering Lorelace to pay $300,000 in damages for defamation and business interference. She immediately declared bankruptcy, claiming she had no assets and couldn't possibly pay, but the judgment would follow her forever, destroying any chance of future financial stability. The legal resolution took 6 months of grinding through the court system, but when it finally concluded, the victory was total and absolute. Lorelace was ordered to pay $300,000 in damages that she'd never be able to afford. My parents were subject to permanent restraining orders with criminal penalties for violations. The court required them to issue a public apology, which they refused to do out of pure spite, landing them in contempt of court with fines and community service. Their reputation in their small community was utterly demolished. Neighbors who'd known them for decades stopped talking to them. Their church asked them to find a different congregation. My father lost clients from his small accounting practice when word spread about the fraud and forgery. My mother was disinvited from her garden club and volunteer organizations. They'd made themselves social pariahs through their own vindictive choices. The real Penthouse, the one I'd actually purchased and kept secret throughout this entire ordeal, became my sanctuary in the truest sense. It was even more beautiful than the rental trap, with custom built-ins I'd designed myself, art I'd collected over years, furniture that reflected my actual taste rather than what interior designers suggested. The master bedroom faced east, so I could watch the sunrise every morning, a daily reminder that I'd survived the darkness and made it to dawn. I filled the space with plants, books, comfortable throws, all the small touches that made it feel like mine in a way nothing else ever had. Every morning I'd stand on the terrace with my coffee, looking out over the city I'd conquered, feeling a peace that had nothing to do with material success and everything to do with finally being free. The healing journey was longer and harder than the legal battle. Therapy became a cornerstone of my recovery, helping me process decades of accumulated trauma, rejection, and systematic emotional abuse. My therapist helped me understand that my parents' treatment had nothing to do with my worth, and everything to do with their own dysfunction, their need to have a golden child and a scapegoat to act out their unresolved issues. I joined a support group for adults estranged from toxic families, finding community with people who understood the unique pain of being rejected by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. I learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was essential self-care. I learned that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation or contact. I learned that I could grieve the family I wished it had while celebrating the life it actually built. My business didn't just recover from the attack, it thrived beyond my wildest projections. The publicity from the legal case, once the truth came out, actually brought me more clients who admired how I'd handled adversity. Companies respected that I'd fought back against fraud and won, seeing it as evidence of the same strategic thinking I brought to their projects. I doubled my revenue within a year, expanded operations to 3 different cities, hired 40 employees instead of 15. I started a mentoring program specifically for young women from dysfunctional families, helping them navigate career development while dealing with toxic family dynamics. Giving back that way, helping others avoid the pitfalls I'd fallen into, became one of the most meaningful parts of my success. I built what therapists call a chosen family, surrounding myself with people who'd earned their place in my life through consistent respect and genuine care. My employees became friends, my clients became collaborators. I dated someone who came from a healthy family, and showed me what normal looked like. Even though that relationship eventually ended amicably, when we realized we wanted different futures. I adopted a rescue dog who'd been abused by previous owners, and we healed together in that penthouse, two survivors learning to trust again. Life became full and rich in ways that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with authenticity. The unexpected twist came about a year after the court case concluded. My youngest cousin Deirdre, who I barely knew because she was 15 years younger than me, reached out through social media with a careful, thoughtful message. She was 22, just graduated from college, and had grown up witnessing the family dysfunction from the sidelines. She apologized for never speaking up during my childhood, even though she'd been too young to really intervene. She told me she'd always admired me, had watched me build something from nothing, and wanted to learn from my example. She asked if we could get coffee, with no expectations, just a chance to connect as adults rather than as pawns in the family drama. I was skeptical at first, wondering if this was another manipulation, but something about Deirdre's message felt genuine. We met for coffee in a neutral public space, and I spent the first hour watching her carefully for signs of deception or ulterior motives. But Deirdre was exactly what she seemed, a young woman who'd seen how toxic our family was and wanted to break free from those patterns. She'd paid her own way through college, refused financial help from her parents because it always came with strings, and was building her own independent life. Over months of careful friendship building, Deirdre proved herself trustworthy. She became a genuine ally and friend, showing me that family dysfunction doesn't have to be inherited, that awareness and choice can break generational cycles. About 18 months after the restraining orders were issued, I received a letter from my mother that technically violated the no-contact order. The envelope was addressed in her familiar handwriting, and I sat staring at it for an hour, before deciding to open it with my therapist present during a session. The letter claimed she'd been diagnosed with terminal cancer, that she had only months to live, that she desperately wanted reconciliation before she died. She talked about regret, about mistakes, about how family should forgive. My therapist watched me read it, saw the conflict on my face, and reminded me that I got to choose my response. This was a bittersweet moment that could have pulled me back into their dysfunction. I struggled with that decision for weeks. Part of me, the child who'd spent decades desperately seeking parental approval, wanted to believe she'd genuinely changed. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to offer forgiveness and reconciliation. But the healthier part of me, the part that had fought so hard for freedom and peace, knew that leopards don't change their spots, and that this was likely another manipulation. I consulted with my therapist, with Deirdre, with trusted friends. Finally, I made my choice. I wrote one letter back, keeping a copy for legal documentation in case she tried to claim I'd violated the restraining order by responding. My letter was brief and clear. I forgive you for my own peace, not for your comfort. I hope you find peace in your remaining time, but that peace will not include me. I never heard back, and never sent another letter. Now, standing in my real penthouse 2 years after that final confrontation, watching the sunset paint my walls gold and amber, I reflect on everything this journey taught me. Success isn't really about the money, though financial security certainly makes life easier and provides options that poverty never could. Success isn't about the luxury penthouse, or the thriving business, or the industry recognition, though those are all nice validations of hard work. Real success is about building a life that reflects your values, surrounding yourself with people who treat you with respect, and having the strength to walk away from anyone who tries to diminish you, even if they're family. The life lessons I learned are ones I share with every young woman I mentor. You cannot negotiate with people who see you as a resource to exploit rather than a person to respect. Family is supposed to be about love and mutual support, not obligation and manipulation. Being related by blood doesn't entitle anyone to your time, your money, your space, or your energy. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential self-preservation. Sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing their game entirely and build your own game with your own rules. Success is great revenge, but peace is even better. And forgiveness, real forgiveness, is something you do for your own healing, not to restore relationships with people who never valued you in the first place. My parents wanted my penthouse. They wanted to take credit for my success, to benefit from my work, to move Lorelace into the life I'd built so she could continue coasting on unearned privilege. Instead, I built a life so complete and so protected that they couldn't touch it. I surrounded that life with legal walls, healthy boundaries, and people who actually cared about me. The penthouse was never really about the physical space, or the luxury or the status. It was always about creating something that was entirely mine, something no one could take from me, something that represented freedom from a family that never appreciated my worth. And that freedom, that peace, that ability to wake up every morning without dreading phone calls or manipulative requests or sabotage attempts, that's worth more than any luxury apartment ever could be. So here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members? And how did you handle the guilt and grief that came with it? Drop your stories in the comments, because I know I'm not alone in this experience, and sharing these stories helps all of us feel less isolated. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and let me know. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building the life you actually deserve, because trust me, there are more chapters to this story and lessons I'm still learning every day. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to prioritize your peace over family obligation. And from my penthouse to wherever you are right now, I'm sending you strength to set whatever boundaries you need. Thank you for listening to my story. You deserve relationships that build you up instead of tearing you down. You deserve a life where your hard work is celebrated instead of sabotaged. You deserve peace. Never forget that. Now go build your own penthouse, whatever that means for you.